Hello, everybody. It's December 8th, 2020. Um, have a bit of unfortunate news to give, and this was prompted by a text message that I got from Master Jose Gonzalez. He's relaying the news to me. He got some messages from this person's family, and it is my displeasure, it is my misfortune to announce that uh, yet another pioneer of the martial arts died this year. It is Grandmaster, now the late Grandmaster Bradley J Steiner of Seattle, Washington. He created the JendoTao system, or sometimes called American Combato. So, a system he announced and created in 1975 after his study and research. He started off in judo under Jerome Mackey. Later studied under Charles Nelson and Rex Applegate, who were both propagators of military combatives, mostly World War II combatives, really. That's what we're looking at. Also studied at the Sigward Sports Academy, studied Japanese Jiu Jitsu with Kiyosei Ai and Caesar Bujutsu. And I can't find anything about this teacher. I can't find anything about this system. Swami Vrigananda, a system called Varmania. I think it's called Varmania or Varmani, um, an Indian martial art. I can't find any footage on it or any documentation of it. But obviously, this is pre 1975. What I can tell you about Bradley J. Steiner, I never met him. I don't think there's any footage that I've seen of him doing any of his system on film. I think he reserved that for if you wanted to purchase a DVD or something like that. But if it's anything like other World War II systems, it's probably very simplistic, very easy to learn, and very easy to transmit. Lots of palm strikes, short, very low kicks, if any, palm strikes, boxing. He was a pioneer in the martial arts in that, in the 70s, there was a lot of Americans creating their own systems. So it's also controversial because prior to that, I think the highest he got in some of the classical or neoclassical systems was second dan, judo, and some of the jujitsu systems. He also studied taekwondo for a while, which, if you see his build, he was a big man. He wasn't an ideal taekwondo person, but obviously he wanted to learn something. He saw something of value in it. But he was mostly a pioneer because he took the classical or traditional Oriental martial arts, particularly judo and jujitsu, and studied those and also studied the Americanized systems of World War II combative military combative systems from the Army, from the Marine Corps, from the Air Force. Um, and that would be when it was fairly new in the country, right? The biggest influx of martial arts, the first influx probably would have been shortly after the creation of judo, but the main one would be after World War II and after the Korean War. Seems like every time we had military involvement in Asia, um, some GIs would go over there and they would learn stuff and they would come back. And I know the Air Force had a probably the most comprehensive empty hand martial art program. They probably devoted the most hours to training pilots and aircraft crew because they could be shot down deep over enemy territory and really have to defend themselves. But I'll tell you, I think his biggest influence is that he was a big advocate of weight training specifically for self-defense. Now, before some of you traditionalists kind of raise the hackles a little bit, I will admit resistance training, use of weights has been part of the martial arts, particularly karate in Okinawa for sure, and in China. Ripping of jars, iron bars, and things like that. It wasn't necessarily modern, systematized, weightlifting, bodybuilding, Olympic lifting, strength building, physique building, weightlifting that we're familiar with in the United States. It was more functional exercises that were sort of loaded with weights. He was big on, things like incorporating squats, bench presses, not just working on strength, but putting on muscular bulk um, as part of his system. And being that systems that we know he studied, uh, many of them worked in grappling range, judo, jujitsu, for example. The World War II systems were, a blend of judo and jujitsu and the odd strikes here and there, right? It does make sense. If you have to close in, grab someone, grip him, throw him down, possibly grapple with him, strength is a factor. And also, if you look at pictures of him, I mean, he himself was strong, and it looks like he was born with a certain amount of size, so it made sense for him to pursue that, right? If you're, lean and very lightweight like Bruce Lee, the mobility, the bouncing around, moving in and out, I mean, that makes sense, right? If you're a big man like the late Bradley J Steiner, working on strength, working on muscular bulk to give you the ability to absorb a shot, to give a shot, it does make sense. But he was a pioneer. He wrote a lot of articles about that. I know because growing up as a kid, back in the early '80s when I discovered martial art magazines, really '70s when I started reading my brother's martial art magazines. I was like, oh, this guy doesn't look like a typical martial artist. Most of the pictures, he'd be in like cargo pants and boots, or blue jeans and sneakers or something. He'd have a jacket on, often with paluettes, t-shirt or something like that. A lot of the pictures he was in civilian gear, and he was demonstrating his techniques. He didn't have like the starched gi and black belt and stuff. So it was stood out in contrast to a lot of what I was looking at. The magazine articles, again, didn't show a whole lot of sequences of techniques. So even to this day, even if I had all the articles in front of me, it would be very hard for me to judge, what that system would be all about. But he was a pioneer. He wrote many, many articles on the interaction between weightlifting and bodybuilding specifically, and self-defense training. And while I didn't necessarily follow his articles word for word, it was added to the list of okay, well, there are quite a few martial artists that say, oh, weightlifting would be good for you. Um, Now, mind you, I'd started off at the JKA Shotokan style, and while you don't necessarily think of Shotokan as being a style that incorporates a lot of weightlifting into its training, I will tell you, quite a few guys were also bodybuilders or weightlifters, and there was a bench, a weight bench in the basement, you know, uh, with a leg extension, right, and barbells and things. So somebody in that place was using it, and I'm guessing it's Master Kisaka, who was the headmaster, right, the sensei. So I was like, okay, well, weightlifting does have a place in martial arts, but I didn't. There was nobody at the dojo teaching me about it. I studied under other teachers, and yeah, I saw 80s. Some people were cross training. Some people were dabbling in weightlifting, or had been weightlifters through other sports and then gotten into martial arts. The '90s rolled around, things again changed. UFC became a thing. Weightlifting, became more and more prominent. And then as time went by, rather than simply doing a weightlifting routine, any old weightlifting routine that would work for any sport, specialized weightlifting, specialized resistance training, um, but that was more geared towards martial art, um, came into prominence, and nowadays it's endemic. And here's the funny thing: you get a lot more, functional exercises that look a lot like what the Okinawans were doing. And people here aren't gripping clay jars filled with pebbles and stuff, but for example, they're doing a lot with kettlebells, right? And in Chinese Kung Fu, you have something called the stone lock, which is pretty much a kettlebell, but they're more like rectangular with a slightly wider base, right? Um, so it's always a shame when one of the pioneers leaves this plane of existence and goes on to the great mystery. but certainly he left his impact. Um, so I'm gonna send my condolences to his family, his associates, his you know his students that trained with him, and so on and so forth. Mine and also Master Jose Gonzalez from Hamilton, New Jersey. Um, while I never met you, you obviously were one of the huge influences on the prior generations, and the ease at which a martial artist today can talk about supplemental weight training, supplemental strength conditioning, even if it's with machines or kettlebells or calisthenics, the ease at which that happens today, he was part of that, right? Along with Bruce Lee. I mean, I think he was participating in strength training and talking about it openly, probably before Bruce Lee kind of came out to the public with it. But I could be wrong about that, right? Um, I do know that military systems of combat, particularly World War II systems, if you were looking at it through the lens of a modern person that, you know, could be cross training several styles and also has access to, looking at MMA, that type of thing, they might seem a little bit simplistic, but that is actually the greatest strength of those systems. Is they're simple, they're often relatively unathletic. Um, it's a known fact, men tend to put on weight as they get older, even if they're active. And so, the idea that by maintaining your weight training, you make sure that that's a muscular weight gain or mostly muscular weight gain, and you learn to use that weight lever as an advantage, by closing in, using short strikes, using takedowns and knees, punches, and of course, quick grappling. I don't think he was a fan of extended grappling. And I say that because there is a quote. I looked at some of the web pages. There is a quote where he says that very little of what I learned in the classical martial arts was useful for self-defense and combat as he perceived it, as he taught it, right? Um, you know, things change. Those of us that have been involved in the martial arts a while, you see trends coming and going, like the definition of what is combat in the World War II era, it's very different. Like, what is a good military combat martial art? There's a lot of, quick down and dirty, gouging the eyes, kneeing the groin, um, throwing people down and stomping on them. A lot of knife work and bayonet work. In my opinion, the bayonet is still a valid weapon today, but the conditions back in World War II and Korea and Vietnam to a degree were kill and be killed. In Vietnam, you also had a lot more interactions with the civilian population. So I'm pretty sure military police, probably had occasions where they wanted to use less than lethal force. Nowadays, the modern military combatives, a lot of what I'm reading about, you know, from sources like Dr. Willink and other military people from other countries that were in the SAS or other thing is a lot of times what we're doing is we're patrolling civilian areas. We're sometimes raiding houses in the middle of the night filled with civilians, and you know, um, usually a young male will take exception to that and try to fight back. They're not necessarily combatants. They're not necessarily terrorists, but they have to be subdued. And so, it's often like two or three guys swarming the guy and basically trying to take him down and flex cuff him or something. So it's a very different situation. I think that's why the army in particular is so fond of Gracie combatives based systems, right? Um, Vietnam era, that wouldn't necessarily be the thing. I don't think if you were in a fire base in um, Vietnam or World War II in the Pacific, uh, you know, facing a night raid by the enemy, and like in World War II, bayonets coming at you and stuff. I don't think taking someone going down and trying to submit them, get an armbar on them, getting on your back would be, and not only would it not be wise, it may be suicidal. Okay, it may be something you want to actively avoid as much as possible, right? But conditions change. You know, um, That's the beauty of the martial arts. That's also part of the task that you face if you want to continue to train and stay relevant. So Bradley J Steiner, pioneer. Um, a lot of what we're doing now. There's things that we do now that are based on what these pioneers did. There's some things they did that we threw away that maybe don't aren't as relevant. And there's things that I guarantee you there are things that Bradley J. Steiner and a lot of these previous generation combatives pioneers taught that we may have thrown away, or the new generations may have thrown away that they shouldn't have, that are very relevant. So there you go. Bradley J. Steiner. Condolences to his family, condolences to his students. 2020 has been a tough year. Not, outside of the martial arts, a lot of people have passed away this year from COVID. Master Teruyuki Okazaki of Shotokan. I'm convinced that if he had not caught COVID, we might have had him for maybe another decade or more. He was advanced in his 80s, possibly 90s. He was active and still doing a lot within the Shotokan world, right? Uh, we just lost Chuck Yeager. We lost Eddie Van Halen. So it is a tough year. Um, so let's take the time to remember these people. Let's take the time to look at their body of work and what they did, and you know, d- delve more into them. Delve more into what they did. Maybe some of what they left behind could be very useful for us. But even if you don't have, let's say you're a young man, you're 16, you're 18, you're a high school wrestler that's also studying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, maybe thinking of transitioning into MMA. I get you. You might be more concerned about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai and less concerned about this material, but you never know. You might run across some weightlifting information. You might also understand that, hey, you tell people you're doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you tell people you're a martial artist, and people may challenge you, and whoa, all of a sudden, you may face a stick, a knife, or a particularly adept striker that has takedown defense. And some of this material, you might be like, man, I need to end this fight quick, right? I need to, end this fight very quick. Things are getting very serious. So all I can say, folks, is hang in there. It's 2020. Be safe and be well. Have a good day.